Former interim DNC chair Donna Brazile is still making the rounds to promote her new book, Hacks. And this last weekend, she was on Real Time with Bill Maher. And as you already could have guessed, Bill Maher said a lot of really stupid things that were incredibly out of touch and downright offensive to democracy. So we'll go ahead and hear what he had to say. And then when we come back, we'll talk about it.
I feel like we spent all of 2017 still stuck in 2016.
I agree.
Can we put the Bernie-Hillary thing aside, that great divide? I mean, that's what all the controversy was with your book, you know, that the elections were, the primaries were rigged. And, you know, it doesn't matter, first of all, now, it's over. And also the policy differences between the Bernie folks and the Hillary folks were really small to begin with. That's another thing that could hold us back.
Well, you know, Bill, after a presidential campaign, we should assess what happened. The Republicans did an autopsy report. I assumed that the Clinton campaign would do their form of autopsy. But as chair of the Democratic Party, I felt a responsibility to tell my story. I was chair.
Yeah.
I became chair because the party was hacked. The country was hacked. And so this notion that somehow or another I cannot tell my story, the story of the Democratic National Committee, in a year that Donald Trump won by less than 100,000 votes, the party needs to examine that. And then I believe we can heal. You cannot heal an open wound by just dressing it, you know, dressing it. You have to analyze it, talk about it, all of it, and then I think we can move forward.
He continues to surprise me with how out of touch he is. And if you would have told me in 2015, when I first started the Humanist Report, that in an interview between Donna Brazile and Bill Maher, that Donna Brazile would be the one that's more correct than Bill Maher, I would have told you that you were crazy. But I mean, that's exactly what happened here. Donna Brazile was more correct, and she stated that, you know, you can't just move on from something without addressing it. How can you restore trust in the DNC if you don't address how they lost that trust to begin with? So first of all, he says, can we put the Bernie and Hillary thing aside? We would all love to put the Bernie and Hillary thing aside, Bill. The problem is that Bernie Sanders supporters and progressives, generally speaking, are still shunned from the party. The reforms needed to put that Bernie and Hillary thing aside have not been carried out yet. So we still have a lot of states with closed primaries. We still have super delegates. These are things that disproportionately hurt independents, who are most likely to vote for Bernie Sanders or support the more progressive left-leaning candidate. So until the Democratic Party actually stops turning away voters, then we still have to talk about this. But in addition to that, the Democratic Party and the DNC, they're still actively trying to harm progressives. Tom Perez, just a couple of weeks ago, even though we got sidetracked from the Donna Brazile bombshell, well, Tom Perez just purged progressives from the DNC. And he did this under the guise of increasing diversity within the DNC, while not explaining to us why he purged the first transgender woman that served on the DNC. He didn't explain to us why James Zogby was fired, the only Arab American serving in the DNC. So of course, he did this because he didn't want anybody serving in the DNC who wasn't loyal to him or the establishment. So now, moving on, he also said that when it comes to the primary being rigged, quote, it doesn't matter now. The rigging of the primary doesn't matter now. That's over. It's done. I don't understand. For someone who claims to care about democracy, because he rails against how Russia used memes to sway the election against Hillary Clinton all the time, how can you say that it doesn't matter now when democracy was undermined? That is insane. And there's a couple of reasons why it still matters. First of all, the DNC, in rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders, and specifically for Hillary Clinton and against all of her opponents, the DNC lost trust of their core base. And if you actually do want them to defeat Republicans, Bill, like you constantly say you do, then voters need assurance that this will never happen again. Now, another reason why it matters is because if the primary wasn't rigged, if the race was fair, Bernie Sanders might have actually beaten Hillary Clinton. And do you want to know who would be president right now if he actually was able to defeat Hillary, Bill? It would not be Donald Trump. It would be Bernie Sanders. And you claim to hate Donald Trump so much. We all do. Donald Trump is a monster. The reason why we have Donald Trump is because the DNC decided that they would rather lose with Hillary Clinton than win with Bernie Sanders. So how can you just say that it doesn't matter now, when all the polls showed that Bernie Sanders would have beat Donald Trump, when you knew that rigging a primary would not bode well for Hillary Clinton in a general election? How can you say it doesn't matter? I will give him partial credit because he's at least not denying the reality. I mean, for a lot of pundits like Joyanne Reid, we can't even get them to admit that the primary was rigged. So it does seem as though Bill Maher is at least acknowledging the fact that the primary was rigged. He's just saying, well, it doesn't really matter. It does matter, Bill. Democracy in this country matters. And if you think that these voter ID laws that Republicans continue to codify into law in red states to disenfranchise people of color, if you think that Russia trying to influence the 2016 election matters, then why wouldn't the primary matter? Primaries are important because you need a strong primary candidate to emerge out of the primary in order to defeat Republicans. That matters. And if we don't learn this going forward, Bill, then we're never going to get out of this nightmare that is the Donald Trump presidency, and a Republican is going to win again in 2024, which is unimaginable at this point. But the DNC has lost its credibility so much that I don't know if they can ever be electorally viable without addressing any of these issues. Now, the last thing he says here is that the policy differences between Bernie folks and the Hillary folks were really small to begin with. No, they were really huge, hence why there was this divide. Hillary Clinton voted for the Iraq War. She voted for the Patriot Act. She pushed for fracking around the world. She didn't support Medicare for all, or a $15 minimum wage, or tuition-free public colleges and universities. She wanted a Syrian no-fly zone. She has a history of supporting the TPP. She voted to deregulate the big banks that donated to her campaign as a senator. She took money from private prisons. She was effectively a Republican with a D in front of her name. So how can you say with the straight face that those policy differences were insignificant? Those policy differences were huge. What a lot of Hillary Clinton loyalists and Democratic Party establishment loyalists don't want to acknowledge is that Hillary Clinton is just too conservative to run in the so-called liberal party. Now, this isn't just Hillary Clinton. Of course, she is one of the more conservative members of the Democratic Party, but there's people to her right like Joe Manchin and Tim Kaine. But the whole party has shifted to the right. The Overton window in this country is so far to the right that we just have two conservative parties, one moderate conservative party, Democrats, and one right-wing extremist party, Republicans. So liberal voters in this election cycle, they took a stand because they had an option to vote for someone who was actually a real liberal who didn't seem to be lying to us like Barack Obama did. Because we could look at Bernie Sanders' donations, and we didn't do that for Barack Obama. And we saw that Bernie wasn't taking any money from Wall Street or the private prison industry or defense contractors. So this divide is something that you can't just brush aside. And Bill Maher, he's got to acknowledge that. But the problem is that these differences, they don't matter. You know, the Bernie-Hillary differences, they don't matter to him because he's an elite. He's an oligarch. He has millions upon millions of dollars in his bank account. So, of course, to him, those differences don't matter much. But to us, you know, the difference between a $12 and a $15 minimum wage is huge. I can't even begin to express just how life-changing $15 would be in comparison with $12 an hour if you are just an ordinary American. So, I mean, I've said it once, I'll say it again. If Bill Maher really wants to get to the bottom of this divide and figure out how the Democratic Party can become electorally viable again, he's got to talk with actual progressives. Invite Kyle Kulinski on the show. Invite Cenk Uygur on the show. You can't just keep claiming that you care about the issues if you only talk to people in your elitist bubble that just reinforce all of your views.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.